You did this!
The morning Brenda Kilpatrick set fire to my great-grandfather's corn barn. She had no clue she'd soon be standing before federal judge Thaddeus Brennan, the same man who locked up the entire Riverside County Commission for a collective 23 years. Now it's 5:47 a.m., and I'm here with my boots grinding against blackened beams and warped steel that still holds the night's heat. The air is thick with a bitter mix of scorched oak, century-old corn dust, and diesel, coating your tongue like ash. Brenda believed she was removing an eyesore dragging down her property values. In reality, she handed me a federal case so airtight it would collapse not just her, but the entire corrupt network she'd been nurturing for years. This smiling HOA president made a catastrophic mistake. She Googled retired judge and assumed I was some harmless old man ready to cave. What she never checked was my specialty, tearing apart corrupt officials who exploit power for profit. Tell me, what would you do if your HOA president torched the barn your great-grandfather built with his Purple Heart hands? Drop where you're watching from, because I promise half of you have a Brenda ruling your neighborhood right now. My name is Thaddeus Brennan, and 3 years ago I thought my prison-sending days were behind me. 27 years on the federal bench trains you to smell corruption from a mile away. But after losing my wife Margaret to cancer, I figured it was time to find some peace on the 47 acres my grandfather Seamus left me in Millfield County, Iowa. Seamus Brennan arrived from County Cork in 1948 with nothing but shrapnel in his leg and hands skilled enough to build things meant to last forever. He raised that corn barn in 1952, each beam carved from Iowa oak, each joint fitted so tightly you couldn't slide a dime through. 70 years later, those weathered walls still carried the sweet smell of dried corn and the ghost of his pipe smoke, laced with that unmistakable scent of old wood hardened by brutal Iowa winters. I'd moved here expecting retirement to mean restoring tractors, planting corn, and savoring the kind of bone-deep quiet you only get when your nearest neighbor is a quarter-mile off. What I didn't count on was that quarter-mile being crammed with 847 identical McMansions, called Millfield Estates, all ruled by a woman who could give Machiavelli lessons in power. Brenda Kilpatrick didn't just lead the Millfield Estates HOA. She owned it like a private kingdom. Picture 5'6" of razor-edged authority dressed in designer suits that cost more than most people's monthly income, clutching a clipboard like it held state secrets. Her white Mercedes matched her bleached smile. And when those stiletto heels hit the pavement, they ticked like a countdown clock. Tick, tick, tick. She'd turned suburban conformity into a weapon. Brenda sold real estate for a living, pushing these cookie-cutter houses to young families who never read the fine print about the HOA's power. Her husband Randy ran the county's largest construction company, giving them more sway over building permits than the commissioners themselves. It was a medieval monarchy, only instead of a castle. They reigned from a strip mall office plastered with motivational posters about community standards. Here's the irony. My property sat dead center in their empire, but entirely outside their reach. Seamus had locked down agricultural exemptions and mineral rights decades ago, back when HOAs were just a glimmer in some developer's eye. Legally, Brenda had as much control over my land as she did the International Space Station, but apparently no one ever explained property law to the self-appointed Empress of Suburbia. Her first royal visit came on a crisp September morning as I was coaxing my grandfather's John Deere back to life. That old diesel rumble always carried me back to Seamus's calloused hands, guiding mine on the wheel when I was 12. I was elbow-deep in the carburetor, inhaling motor oil and morning dew, when her heels started machine-gunning up my gravel driveway like incoming fire. "Mr. Brennan." Her voice had that real estate agent lilt, honey poured over razor wire. "I'm Brenda Kilpatrick, HOA president. We need to discuss your agricultural structures." She stood there in a cream suit, glaring at my freshly painted red barn like it had personally insulted her family tree. The morning sun made that barn glow like something out of American Gothic, a genuine piece of Americana. Feeding families since Harry Truman was in office. "Ma'am," I said, wiping diesel from my hands with an old rag, "I appreciate you stopping by. But that barn's been grandfathered since before your subdivision was even a gleam in some contractor's mind." Her smile tightened like a noose. "Mr. Brennan, property values in our community depend on maintaining certain aesthetic standards. That eyesore is visible from 17 homes, and frankly, it's destroying everyone's investment. The diesel behind us settled into a steady heartbeat. I could taste autumn creeping in, the season of harvest. I understand your concern, I replied, but this is private agricultural property. Your HOA has exactly zero jurisdiction here. That's when her mask didn't just slip, it disintegrated. Her eyes went flat and her voice dropped to a whisper more menacing than any sentencing I'd ever handed down. Mr. Brennan, there are many creative solutions to problems that affect our community's prosperity. I do hope you won't force us to explore them. The way she said creative solutions made my old prosecutor instincts flare. Exactly 1 week later, Brenda's first creative solution arrived in the form of Dale Hoffman, Millfield County's code enforcement officer. He rolled up in a county pickup that looked like it had survived a war, clutching a clipboard thick enough to stop a bullet. "Mr. Brennan," Dale stammered, voice cracking like a teenager asking for a prom date, "I've got some, complaints here about potential code violations on your property." I set down my coffee mug, the one that said, "I survived 27 years of federal court, and all I got was this lousy retirement," and walked over. Dale shifted from foot to foot like a man about to face a firing squad. The October air bit sharp, carrying his nervous sweat in waves. "What kind of violations, Dale?" I asked. He flipped through papers with trembling hands. "Well, there have been anonymous complaints about noise ordinances, dust control, potential rodent harboring, improper storage of agricultural equipment, septic system concerns, environmental hazards." His voice got smaller with every word. I'd seen enough frightened witnesses to know when someone was being squeezed. "How many complaints this week, Dale?" 14. It fell from his mouth like a death sentence. 14 anonymous complaints in 1 week against a farm that had minded its own business since Eisenhower. Dale's Adam's apple bobbed. "Look, Judge, sorry, Mr. Brennan, I know this stinks worse than a pig farm in August, but I've got twin daughters starting college next year, and certain people with influence over county contracts have made it crystal clear that thorough enforcement here would be career-enhancing." The way he stressed thorough enforcement told me everything. "Who's putting the screws on you, Dale?" He glanced around like snipers might be hiding in my corn, then pulled out his phone. "She's not even hiding it anymore." He handed it over. The screen showed a voicemail transcript. "Dale, this is Brenda Kilpatrick. The Brennan situation requires immediate and comprehensive attention. I trust you understand the importance of maintaining community standards. Rise Company has several county projects coming up for bid, and we value working with cooperative officials. Holy, she just handed me a smoking gun with her fingerprints on it." My prosecutor brain roared back to life. 27 years dismantling corruption had taught me the smell of a mob shakedown. "Dale, quick legal education," I said. "You know Iowa's Right to Farm Act?" He shook his head like a confused retriever. Iowa Code. Chapter 352 protects agricultural operations established before surrounding development. It specifically forbids local governments from using nuisance ordinances to harass pre-existing farms. I gestured to the barn, older than both of us combined. Every single complaint you just listed falls under nuisance ordinances. Right to farm laws in most states create an ironclad shield against harassment of agricultural operations that predate development. If your farm or rural property was there first, look up your state's protections. They're often bulletproof. Dale's face went ghost white. "Are you saying these complaints are illegal?" "I'm saying whoever's coaching you either doesn't know agricultural law or is betting you don't." I started snapping photos of his clipboard. "Mind if I document this learning moment?" "Jesus, Judge, if Brenda finds out I let you—" My courtroom voice could stop a charging bull. "I'm not your problem, Dale, but someone is using county resources for a personal vendetta against protected agricultural property. That makes you an unwitting accomplice to official misconduct." He looked like someone had just told him his lottery ticket was fake. "What the hell am I supposed to do?" "Simple. Do your job honestly. File your report noting every complaint targets activities protected under Iowa agricultural exemptions. Photograph normal farm operations. Follow the law, not orders." Dale spent the next half hour photographing my perfectly ordinary barn, tractor, and equipment. The morning light made it all look like a postcard from the American heartland, because that's exactly what it was. And while he documented my violations, I was building a federal case. Every harassment visit, every abuse of county resources, every attempt to weaponize local government for private gain went into a file growing fatter by the day. That evening, my phone rang at exactly 8:47 p.m. Some people are predictably punctual, even with threats. Mr. Brennan. Brenda's voice could have flash-frozen hell. I understand you've been interfering with legitimate community enforcement activities. The woman had nerves the size of Iowa. Ms. Kilpatrick, I said, I've simply documented your systematic abuse of county resources for personal harassment. Personal harassment? Her laugh could have shattered glass. Mr. Brennan, you clearly don't understand how civilized communities work. People who insist on being difficult neighbors often find their problems multiplying exponentially. And there it was. Another threat, delivered with the offhand certainty of someone who'd never been held accountable for misusing authority. Miss Kilpatrick, I said, letting 3 decades of judicial command seep into my tone. I think you're about to discover that certain problems have a way of turning into everyone else's solutions. The silence that followed was glacial, so cold I could almost hear her brain calculating whether she'd bitten off more than she could chew. 10 days later, Brenda's next burst of ingenuity arrived as legal paperwork, handed to me by a process server who looked like he'd rather be carrying anthrax. The lawsuit filed in. Millfield County District Court demanded the immediate demolition of my supposedly hazardous farm building and $50,000 for lost property value and emotional suffering. Sitting at my kitchen table, reading this fiction while my coffee cooled, I laughed so hard at its audacity my ribs hurt. In 27 years of seeing frivolous claims, this one was a masterpiece. Brenda's lawyers argued that my 70-year-old barn endangered public welfare, attracted vermin and vagrants, and could even be used to hide terrorists in a corn barn. In Iowa, but the letterhead told the real story. Hawthorne Sterling and Associates, a Des Moines firm billing $800 an hour to help developers crush rural communities. This wasn't some small-town attorney chasing easy money. This was heavyweight legal artillery costing more per day than most people earn in a year. Someone was literally betting the farm to get rid of my barn. I dug into county property records, and what I uncovered sent my blood pressure through the roof. Over the past 18 months, 3 shell companies had quietly purchased every acre of farmland within 2 miles of Millfield Estates. Every deed listed the same purchasing agent, Kilpatrick Development Solutions, LLC, and the registered address, Rice Construction Company office. This wasn't about removing an eyesore. It was about assembling a 1,000-acre development empire, and my 47 acres sat in the center like a stubborn splinter. Time to bring in federal-grade legal muscle. My former law clerk, Michael Chen, had become Chicago's most feared civil rights attorney, the kind who gave corrupt officials night sweats. Judge Brennan, he said when I called, please tell me someone's dumb enough to violate your constitutional rights. Michael, I replied, county government is being used to steal my land, and they just filed a lawsuit so absurd it belongs in a sitcom. Within 72 hours, Michael had filed a motion to dismiss for lack of standing, plus a federal countersuit under 42 U.S.C. Paragraph 1983, enough to make Brenda's legal team soil their bespoke suits. Section 1983 strips government immunity from officials who violate constitutional rights under color of law, making them personally liable for damages, including attorney fees. When local officials exploit their power for private gain, they can be sued as individuals and forced to pay from their own pockets. But the real fireworks started when Agent Sarah Kowalski called back. I was swapping spark plugs in my John Deere when the phone rang. Her voice over my shop speakers mingled with the clink of tools and the smell of motor oil. Judge, that HOA issue you mentioned, it just went federal. We've been tracking a coordinated land fraud ring across 6 Iowa counties, rural owners harassed into distress sales by shell companies tied to local officials. Let me guess, I said. Wiping grease off a rag older than some politicians? Their targets are elderly farmers, veterans, and minorities. Bullseye. The pattern's always the same: anonymous complaints, petty violations, expensive legal warfare to force quick sales. Your Brenda Kilpatrick just earned herself a federal file. The autumn air suddenly tasted like victory. Brenda thought she was playing small-town politics. In reality, she'd tap-danced into a federal fraud case. That afternoon, I drove through Millfield Estates to see what $50 million of suburban sameness bought. The place was a monument to creative bankruptcy. 8 on 47 near-identical houses stamped from the same architectural Play-Doh mold, each perched on its regulation quarter-acre with HOA-approved lawns. I parked my beat-up pickup, rust spots, faded Vietnam veteran bumper sticker and all, in front of Brenda's immaculate house and took my time surveying her kingdom. I was admiring her obsessively perfect landscaping when a neighbor approached like he was sneaking across a minefield, a man in his 30s, pushing a stroller with one hand and clutching a coffee like it held courage. "You're the judge with the barn, right?" He glanced around as if Brenda might rappel off a roof. "I'm Marcus Rodriguez. Thank you for fighting back." That woman's made our lives a bureaucratic nightmare for 2 years. What kind of nightmare? I asked. $80 fines for leaving a basketball hoop up after sunset. Notices for parking my work truck in my own driveway. Supposedly ruins neighborhood aesthetics. She even tried to fine us $400 because our daughter drew hopscotch squares in chalk. His exhaustion was palpable. The sound of someone worn down by years of petty tyranny. "Have you documented these violations?" Marcus laughed, sharp and brittle. "Judge, I've got enough notices to insulate my attic. My wife says we should frame them as modern art, the slow destruction of the American dream." I handed him my card. "Marcus, would you testify about discriminatory enforcement in federal court?" His eyes lit up like I'd handed him a winning lottery ticket. "Judge, I'd crawl through broken glass to testify against her. Half this neighborhood would throw a parade if someone finally took her down." As I drove home, I spotted Brenda in her picture window, framed by shutters that probably cost more than most people's cars. She thought she was collecting intel on her enemy. In reality, she was watching a federal judge document her crimes in real time. Brenda's third act of creativity was classic sabotage. The power first went out at 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday. Not unusual for rural Iowa, except it happened again Thursday, then Saturday, then every few days after. The utility kept apologizing for equipment failures, but somehow the failures only hit my property. Then my water pressure dwindled to a trickle. The county blamed infrastructure issues, but Marcus called to say his water was flowing fine. Her masterstroke arrived as an anonymous letter to the editor of the Millfield Gazette one Wednesday while I was coaxing my generator back to life. Signed only "A Concerned Neighbor," it painted me as a dangerous recluse stockpiling suspicious materials and acting erratically toward residents. Diesel fumes from my generator mingled with crisp. November air as I read this fiction over coffee. Apparently, I was now a domestic terrorism suspect because I owned farm equipment and had told an HOA president to pound sand. That afternoon, reviewing security footage from the night the power went out, I noticed something at 2:14 a.m., 3 minutes before the outage. A white Mercedes cruised slowly past my property. My infrared camera captured the license plate perfectly. Horan 1, Brenda's vanity plate. She'd been casing my place in the middle of the night, probably hunting for sabotage opportunities. If Brenda thought a few power cuts and small-town gossip would break me, she hadn't done her homework on federal judges. "We don't break. We build cases." I called Agent Kowalski with an update. "Sarah, our HOA queen just escalated to infrastructure sabotage and character assassination. I've got video of her surveillance, documented utility tampering, and now she's trying to brand me a security threat." "Perfect," Sarah said, her voice brimming with satisfaction. "Judge, what I'm about to tell you will make your day. We just got approval for electronic surveillance on the Kilpatrick organization. Turns out your barn drama is linked to a multi-county conspiracy involving municipal officials, development firms, and systematic civil rights violations. The pieces were falling into place like a perfectly built prosecution. While Brenda played amateur sabotage games, the FBI was building a federal racketeering case that could put her away for decades. That evening, my phone began ringing with calls from neighbors I'd never met. Word had spread. The old judge was fighting back. People came forward with their own Brenda horror stories. Mrs. Chen, an elderly widow on Maple Lane, told me Brenda had fined her $200 for hanging laundry outside. Clotheslines were supposedly inconsistent with community standards, though no rule said so. Tom Patterson, a veteran on Oak Street, received violation notices whenever he parked his motorcycle in his own driveway. Brenda called it commercial equipment, though he wrote it to his VA hospital job. The pattern was undeniable. Brenda targeted people who couldn't afford to fight back. seniors on fixed incomes, families with kids, veterans rebuilding their lives, anyone who looked like an easy mark. My favorite call came from Jennifer Walsh, a single mom fined for having a non-regulation garden gnome. When she asked what rule it broke, Brenda claimed gnomes attracted the wrong element. Jennifer asked whether she meant the gnomes or the people who liked them. Brenda's answer apparently wasn't printable in polite company, but the most chilling call came from Marcus Rodriguez. "Judge, I need to tell you something. Brenda cornered my wife at the grocery store yesterday. She said it'd be a shame if my immigration status came under federal review. My blood pressure spiked. Marcus, are you a naturalized citizen? 20 years ago, Judge. The certificate's framed in my living room. But Brenda doesn't know that, and she's betting I'm too scared to find out what trouble she can cause." That threat crossed a line, from harassment into federal crime. Using immigration enforcement as a weapon against a U.S. citizen for personal revenge was not just abuse of power, it was a felony. That night, I documented every call, every story, every pattern of discrimination Brenda had inflicted on her neighbors. My filing cabinet was starting to look like the evidence room of a major racketeering case, which, as it turned out, it was. At 3:17 a.m., I woke to the smell of smoke. Looking out my bedroom window, I saw an orange glow where my grandfather's barn once stood. The building that had survived 70 Iowa winters, sheltered 3 generations of harvests, endured the Dust Bowl and the 1980s farm crisis, was burning like a Viking funeral pyre. Standing in my pajamas, I watched 70 years of family history turn to ash and felt something I hadn't felt since my first day on the federal bench. The cold, focused fury that precedes destroying someone's entire world. Brenda Kilpatrick had just made the biggest mistake of her life. Even as the fire department doused the smoldering remains, I was on the phone. First call, Agent Kowalski, who picked up on the second ring despite it being 4:23 a.m. "Federal arson of a veteran's heritage property," I told her, voice steady despite the rage. "I've got footage." "I've got motive. And I've got enough evidence to bury this operation. Judge, I'm on my way. Don't touch anything. Don't speak to anyone but federal agents. And for God's sake, don't do anything that might compromise prosecution." Second call, Michael Chen. "Michael, they burned down my grandfather's barn. I want a federal civil rights lawsuit so thorough it bankrupts everyone involved down to their grandchildren." Third call, the one that would change everything, went to my old colleague, Judge Patricia Morrison, who'd handled property law cases for 3 decades. "Patty, walk me through agricultural exemptions and HOA authority. If someone wanted to force the sale of grandfathered farmland, what's the legal mechanism?" "Thad," she said, "the only way to break an agricultural exemption is to prove the land's no longer used for farming or that the exemption was fraudulently obtained." "Why do you ask?" It slammed into me like a hammer to the skull. I'd been seeing this the wrong way all along. I snatched up my laptop and dove into county records, digging deeper than I ever had before. What I uncovered in the original HOA incorporation papers made my hands tremble with rage. The shocker? Millfield Estates HOA wasn't just a homeowners association. Hidden in Section 47C of its founding, documents was a clause granting the HOA the first right of refusal on any non-conforming property within a 2-mile radius at only 60% of its assessed market value. Suddenly, every harassment tactic, every phony violation, every attempt to drive me off my land snapped into focus. This wasn't random cruelty. It was a deliberate, coordinated plan to make my life unbearable until I'd sell for pennies on the dollar, straight. Into Brenda's hands, the real bombshell was in the financial disclosures I unearthed at the county clerk's office. Brenda Kilpatrick personally owned $2.3 million worth of stock in Heartland Development Corporation, the very company holding purchase options on my land and every other farm they'd targeted. She wasn't just an HOA president intoxicated by power. She was running a multi-million-dollar land fraud machine. Many HOA charters bury obscure clauses granting boards special acquisition rights most homeowners never read. These provisions can legally enable HOAs to scoop up nearby properties far below market value. Always read the full HOA covenants before buying into any development. Hidden powers like these can be stunning. The financial spiderweb reached further than I'd imagined. Rise construction firm had received 847 building permits for Millfield Estates, along with contracts for every road, utility line, and piece of infrastructure. The combined value topped $50 million, all funneled through companies Brenda either owned or controlled. My 47 acres weren't just an eyesore to her, they were the missing puzzle piece in a development empire worth hundreds of millions. With my property, they could add 200 more luxury homes, a shopping plaza, maybe even a golf course. No wonder she was willing to commit federal arson to erase me. I spent the rest of that morning compiling everything, building a financial conspiracy. Case that would make the Watergate prosecutors envious. By the time Agent Kowalski showed up at 7:15 a.m., I had enough evidence to prove Brenda Kilpatrick was orchestrating the most sophisticated rural land fraud operation in Iowa's history. "Agent Kowalski," I said, handing her a thick folder as we stood among the ashes of my grandfather's barn. "I think we need to talk about RICO charges." The smell of burned oak drifted with the morning air, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I smiled. Brenda thought torching my barn would break me. Instead, she'd handed me the master key to her entire criminal network. By 8 a.m., my dining room had been transformed into a federal war room. Agent Kowalski arrived with 2 more FBI agents and enough evidence boxes to stock a library. Fresh coffee mingled with the lingering scent of charred wood through my windows, a perfect reminder of what we were fighting for. "Judge Brennan," Kowalski said, spreading files across my grandmother's oak table, "what you've uncovered connects to our wider investigation in ways that are, frankly, staggering. Brenda Kilpatrick isn't just running a local scam. She's Iowa's hub in a multi-state land fraud network, Agent." Rodriguez, a sharp-eyed investigator from the Des Moines field office, brought up a tablet showing financial flowcharts like a spiderweb designed by a paranoid mathematician. "We've tracked identical schemes in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Illinois," he said. "Same pattern: HOA harassment, municipal corruption, forced property sales, massive development profits." The third agent, Thompson, was already setting up surveillance gear. "Judge, we'd like your permission to wire your property. When Brenda makes her next move, and she will, we want every word captured at federal court quality." While the FBI turned my farm into a surveillance outpost, I was assembling the legal strategy that would crush Brenda's empire. Michael Chen drove in from Chicago with a legal team that looked like they could prosecute war crimes. My former clerk, Sarah Martinez, flew in from Denver with her expertise in municipal corruption cases. "Thad," Michael said, scanning my files, "this is the most comprehensive civil rights violation case I've seen in 15 years. We're talking systematic targeting of protected classes, misuse of government resources, conspiracy to defraud. This is a prosecutor's dream." Under federal RICO statutes, a pattern of criminal conduct through an organization can lead to forfeiture of the entire enterprise and triple damages for victims. When criminals hide behind legitimate businesses, federal prosecutors can seize it all: bank accounts, properties, even personal assets. Community mobilization outpaced my expectations. Marcus Rodriguez organized a secret meeting in St. Mary's Catholic Church basement. By Thursday night, 47 Millfield Estates residents showed up with documentation of Brenda's harassment campaigns. Mrs. Chen brought a shoebox full of violation notices, each more absurd than the last. Tom Patterson produced photos of Brenda's people measuring his lawn with rulers. Jennifer Walsh played recorded calls where Brenda threatened to have her kids removed by social services for inadequate yard maintenance. "Judge," Marcus said, standing before the group, "we've all been living in fear for years. Some of us were even scared to hang our flags on Veterans Day because Brenda called patriotic displays politically divisive. She's made us feel like prisoners in our own homes." The documentation effort revealed the scale of Brenda's operation. Over 3 years, she'd issued 1,147 violation notices to 187 families. The average fine was $312, but the psychological toll was incalculable. People were moving out rather than endure her constant harassment. My favorite piece of evidence came from Bob Hendris, a retired postal worker fined for having a non-regulation American flag in his front yard. When he asked Brenda which rule he'd violated, she claimed flags had to be proportionally appropriate to the residential aesthetic. Bob responded by installing a 30-foot flagpole in his backyard and flying. A flag the size of a bedsheet, technically not in his front yard, and thus not breaking her invented rule. While the FBI built its criminal case and Michael prepped our civil lawsuit, I worked on the pièce de résistance, a sweeping federal complaint to drag the entire network into public view. Tom Brennan, no relation, editor of the Millfield Gazette, leapt at the chance to cover the county's biggest story. "Judge, this is Pulitzer material," he said. "A federal judge taking down municipal corruption in his own backyard? This is going national." The media plan was critical. We needed public exposure to keep Brenda from destroying evidence or intimidating witnesses. Tom coordinated with the Des Moines Register, and by Friday afternoon, reporters from 3 major papers were requesting interviews. Agent Kowalski brought in technical experts to analyze the barn fire security footage. The results were damning. 3 vehicles identified between 2 and 3 a.m., Brenda's Mercedes plus 2 trucks registered to Rise Construction Firm. "Judge," she said, showing me enhanced footage on her laptop, "we've got them dead to rights. Vehicle IDs, cell tower pings, even chemical residue confirming accelerant use. This isn't just arson. It's a federal terrorism charge waiting to happen." By Sunday evening, our combined legal and investigative team had enough evidence to topple a small government. The plan was elegant. Use the upcoming HOA meeting to publicly expose Brenda's crimes. With federal agents ready to arrest and the media present to record everything. "Brenda thinks she's been playing chess," I told the team during our final strategy session. "She doesn't realize we've been playing federal prosecution all along, and she just walked into checkmate." My grandfather's wind chimes clinked on the porch as the autumn air drifted in, and I could almost feel Seamus nodding his approval. This wasn't just about avenging my barn anymore. It was about rescuing an entire community from a predator feeding on their fear. Brenda's desperation surfaced 3 days before the HOA meeting in a move so audacious I almost admired. She showed up at my door at exactly 10 a.m. on Tuesday, flanked by County Commissioner Dale Fitzpatrick, whose suit strained over his belly like a sausage about to burst. "Mr. Brennan," Brenda said, her voice dripping fake concern, "I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding. Dale and I would like to discuss a mutually beneficial resolution to our community situation." I invited them into my kitchen, the smell of fresh coffee mingling with the charred scent still drifting through the windows. What they didn't know was Agent Kowalski's team had wired my entire house, every word they spoke captured in pristine digital quality. "Commissioner." Fitzpatrick eased himself into my grandfather's chair and got right to it. "Judge, we understand you've suffered some property damage recently. The county would like to make this right." Brenda opened her briefcase with surgical precision, producing documents that raised my eyebrows. "Mr. Brennan, I'm prepared to offer you $400,000 for your property. Cash, 30-day closing, no inspections or contingencies. $400,000 for land worth at least $1.2 million. They weren't even pretending this wasn't a shakedown. "That's very generous," I said evenly, my phone app recording every word. "But I'm not looking to sell." Fitzpatrick leaned in, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. "Judge, between you and me, things could get complicated if this dispute drags on. Tax assessments, environmental inspections, infrastructure requirements. These can get expensive quickly," Brenda nodded sympathetically. "What Dale means is we can make your legal troubles disappear. That federal lawsuit, the insurance claims from the fire, all resolved quietly if we can reach an understanding. They were openly offering to obstruct federal justice for my land. And if I don't accept this generous offer?" I asked, pouring myself more coffee, my hands steady despite my racing pulse. Fitzpatrick's smile was as warm as a January blizzard. "Well, Judge, county government has many tools, building inspections, septic reviews, tax audits. These processes can be very thorough when public safety is at stake." I let them talk for another 20 minutes, documenting every threat, every bribe, every abuse of power. They laid out their corruption network like a PowerPoint, naming which county officials cooperated and which federal investigators could be redirected with the right pressure. The highlight was Brenda explaining that my attitude problem was depressing county property values, and that selling would be my patriotic duty to support economic growth. Apparently, surrendering your family land to corrupt officials was now considered civic service. After they left, I called Agent Kowalski immediately. Sarah, I just recorded a sitting county commissioner offering to obstruct federal justice and an HOA president trying to bribe a federal witness. Please tell me you got it all. Every beautiful word, Judge, she said. We've got enough for conspiracy, bribery, obstruction of justice, and abuse of office. Your little coffee meeting just became the centerpiece of our federal case, but Brenda wasn't finished with her desperate tactics. That afternoon, Marcus Rodriguez phoned in a panic. Judge, they're escalating. Brenda just got my wife fired from the county hospital. They're claiming budget cuts, but Maria was the only one let go. And she just received a performance bonus last month. The attacks on my supporters were ruthless and calculated. Mrs. Chen got a notice her property. Taxes were being reassessed for overvaluation. Tom Patterson was cited for a motorcycle noise violation, even though it hadn't run in 3 days. Jennifer Walsh called to say social services had shown up after an anonymous child welfare tip. The investigator apologized when he saw her immaculate home and well-cared-for children. Admitting the complaint was suspiciously vague and almost certainly malicious. Federal witness intimidation laws impose harsh penalties, up to 20 years in prison for threatening or retaliating against anyone cooperating with federal authorities. If you're assisting with a federal case and experience retaliation, keep records of every incident and report them immediately. Intimidation charges often carry sentences even longer than the original offense. That evening, my phone started buzzing with reporters' calls. Someone had leaked details of the federal probe to the press. Overnight, my small HOA conflict became front-page news across Iowa. Judge Brennan, said Katie Morrison from Channel 7 News, can you confirm whether you're cooperating with a federal investigation into municipal corruption in Millfield County? The leak was no accident. Brenda wanted to shape the story, casting herself as a victim of federal intrusion and me as a bitter ex-judge abusing connections to bully honest officials. But her strategy collapsed spectacularly. Instead of sympathy, she triggered a storm of scrutiny over her finances and political ties. By Thursday morning, 3 additional outlets were digging into HOA abuse across the state, and the Attorney General had announced an inquiry into municipal corruption. Brenda had tried to silence me with threats and bribes. Instead, she had unleashed a media firestorm that revealed her corruption statewide. She was digging her own grave with a federally stamped shovel. Her final desperate move came as a PR campaign worthy of Joseph Goebbels. She hired Meridian Crisis Management, a Chicago firm that rebrands disgraced politicians and executives. Within 2 days, Millfield County was saturated with a narrative portraying me as a bitter has-been using federal influence to terrorize innocent leaders. The campaign was polished and ruthless. Fake social media accounts spread claims that I had retired early due to cognitive decline and judicial misconduct. Facebook groups filled with posts questioning my sanity, framing my HOA fight as evidence of paranoia. The most damaging blow was a leaked audio tape, supposedly from a closed judicial conference, where a voice resembling mine appeared to brag about releasing dangerous criminals on technicalities. The audio was masterfully forged, blending real clips from my hearings with fabricated lines meant to destroy my credibility. But Brenda miscalculated. She underestimated how much federal agents loathe being deceived. At 6:23 a.m., Agent Kowalski called, her voice sharp with controlled fury. Judge, that recording is as fake as a $3 bill. Our analysts found at least 17 splice points, and the voice pattern doesn't match your speech. Whoever created this faces federal charges for fabricating evidence. The FBI struck fast. Within hours, they traced the doctored tape to a Des Moines media firm known for political reputation management. The client list was full of corrupt Midwest officials, and records revealed a direct wire transfer from Kilpatrick Development Solutions. While Brenda destroyed her credibility with forgeries, I documented the retaliation campaign against anyone who supported me. The harassment became vindictive. Marcus Rodriguez suddenly faced a review of his immigration status, though he had been a U.S. citizen for 20 years. The supposed request came not from federal agencies, but from Commissioner Fitzpatrick. Immigration agents, baffled, discovered Marcus was naturalized decades ago. Mrs. Chen received a condemnation notice claiming her 70-year-old home was unsafe. The inspector later admitted he'd never even seen her property. He was told to find problems with anyone backing me. Tom Patterson was arrested for public intoxication in his own driveway, stone sober. Deputy Kevin Walsh later confessed he was ordered to arrest Patterson, even though the veteran hadn't touched alcohol in 15 years. My personal favorite was when they accused me of agricultural terrorism, claiming I was harboring dangerous livestock in a barn I didn't own. The animal control officer arrived with a warrant to seize my so-called militant chickens, only to find I had no poultry at all. When he asked who filed the complaint, his boss shrugged, saying it came from reliable community sources. But their retaliation had an unintended effect. It created new federal witnesses. Every abuse of power, every fraudulent action, every misuse of county resources created more victims eager to testify. Under federal law, anyone aiding a criminal conspiracy can face the same charges as its leaders. Officials who use power to protect conspiracies become part of them. Agent Kowalski's case widened to include 12 county officials, 6 business owners, and a corruption network spanning 3 congressional districts. The evidence was so strong that prosecutors were considering RICO charges that could lock them up for decades. The breaking point came when Brenda filed paperwork to have me committed for psychiatric evaluation. She claimed I was dangerous and delusional, citing conspiracies against community leaders. The petition was signed by Dr. Gerald Hoffman, Dale's brother, who said he observed my mental decline despite never meeting me. The commitment order came from Judge Timothy Fitzpatrick, the commissioner's nephew. Their family network of corruption would have been comical if it wasn't so dangerous. When Deputy Walsh delivered the papers, he found himself under FBI surveillance. Realizing what was happening, he admitted he was only following orders. "Son," I told him, "start documenting those orders carefully. The FBI doesn't look kindly on people carrying out illegal commands." That evening, Kowalski called with news that made my day. "Judge, we have enough to dismantle the entire network. 14 indictments are being prepared, including Brenda. The U.S. Attorney wants arrests to happen with maximum media coverage." "When?" I asked. "Tomorrow night at the HOA meeting. In front of everyone." The autumn breeze carried the promise of justice. Brenda had spent months trying to ruin me with lies and intimidation. Tomorrow she would learn what happens when you attack a federal judge who spent 27 years mastering legal warfare. The Millfield Community Center had never seen such a crowd. 437 people crammed into a hall built for 200, with others outside and live streaming. The atmosphere was electric, tense, and heavy with anticipation. I arrived at 7 p.m. sharp, carrying my grandfather's charred hammer in an evidence bag. The symbolism was blunt, but so was justice. Kowalski's team blended into the crowd as residents. Brenda opened the meeting, still convinced she owned the narrative. Wearing a navy Armani suit worth more than most mortgages, she smiled with courtroom confidence. "Before we start tonight's agenda," she said, "I must address the harassment campaign against your HOA leaders by individuals unwilling to respect community standards." The murmurs in the room weren't supportive. Phones buzzed, whispers spread. People knew about the federal probe. "Mrs. Kilpatrick," I called from the back, "I'd like to respond to those allegations." She paled, but couldn't deny me without looking guilty. "Mr. Brennan, you'll have your turn during public comment." "Actually," said Kowalski, rising, "he'll speak now. FBI Special Agent Sarah Kowalski, this meeting is now a federal evidence-gathering session." The room erupted. Phones out, reporters pushing forward, Brenda's face flickering between fury and panic. Commissioner Fitzpatrick tried to flee but was intercepted by Agent Rodriguez. I stepped to the podium with my laptop and a thick folder. The room fell silent as I set my grandfather's hammer on the podium, its thud echoing. "My name is Judge Thaddeus Brennan, retired. 3 months ago, Brenda Kilpatrick began harassing me to force me off my land, culminating in arson. What she didn't realize was that she documented federal crimes every step. I projected bank records and shell company documents on the screen, showing Brenda's multi-million-dollar land fraud spanning 6 counties. For 18 months, Mrs. Kilpatrick and her allies used county resources to target seniors, veterans, and minority homeowners, forcing sales to companies she secretly controlled. Federal RICO law allows prosecutors to seize every asset connected to these crimes. Brenda tried to protest. "This is absurd. Brennan is a disturbed man harassing community leaders. He needs psychiatric help." That's when I played the recording of her bribery attempt. Her voice filled the hall, undeniable. "We can make your legal troubles disappear. The lawsuit, the fire claims, all can be resolved quietly if we come to an understanding." Silence followed. "Mrs. Kilpatrick," I said, "you made one mistake. You assumed a retired federal judge wouldn't know how to build a case. You were wrong." Kowalski stepped forward, cuffs in hand. Brenda Kilpatrick, you are under arrest for conspiracy, mail fraud, wire fraud, bribery, obstruction, and civil rights violations under color of law. The crowd roared. Cameras flashed. Mrs. Chen shouted, "Finally!" with 70 years of satisfaction. As Brenda was cuffed, I leaned into the mic. "Mrs. Kilpatrick, you once told me there were creative ways to solve problems. Turns out you were right. Though I doubt federal prison was the solution you envisioned." Fitzpatrick tried to run, only to be caught. Deputy Walsh, now cooperating with the FBI, had already begun giving testimony. The community center transformed into a crime scene, a media event, and a collective release. The cheers weren't cruel. They were relief from people freed from a petty tyrant. Marcus Rodriguez stood, tears streaming. "Judge, you gave us our community back." The autumn air drifted in, carrying the scent of long-delayed justice. Brenda's reign had ended. Millfield Estates was free. 6 months later, I stood where my grandfather's barn once burned, watching volunteers raise its replacement. The smell of cut oak and the sound of hammers echoed Seamus's era 70 years earlier. Brenda was serving 12 years after pleading guilty to racketeering, conspiracy, and civil rights violations. She accepted the deal after prosecutors threatened RICO charges that could have kept her locked up for life. Her $2.1 million restitution funded county improvements. Fitzpatrick got 8 years. Walsh earned probation for cooperation. The Kilpatrick network collapsed, taking down 14 officials and business leaders who thought themselves untouchable. The sweetest justice came when Randy Kilpatrick's construction firm was blacklisted, forced to bid on sidewalk repairs.